It begins quietly. The sun has barely risen when an unassuming man in plain clothes enters a sprawling retail space he owns, but where no one knows his face. He's the CEO, but today he's undercover, so blending in with the early staff and cleaning crews. He walks past stocked shelves and humming equipment until he spots a janitor. Shoulders slumped, hands trembling, eyes wet with tears. At that moment, time seemed to slow. This is not just a scene about a CEO and an employee. It's a scene about the invisible stories that unfold every day in workplaces and communities. The janitor's quiet pain echoes the struggles of countless people whose hardships go unnoticed because no one is looking closely enough. But today, someone is looking. Someone with the power to listen and to act. What follows is more than an investigation. It's an awakening. An awakening to the hidden pressures and injustices endured by those at the margins, and to the power of leadership not as control but as compassion. This is a story about empathy that becomes policy, about listening that becomes transformation, about the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and the belief that even in the harshest conditions, dignity can be restored. The morning sun hung low over the small-town strip mall, casting a golden glow on the sidewalk. Inside the quiet store, a janitor named Henry stood with a mop in his hand, fighting back tears he hoped no one would see. Henry had worked here for 15 years, long nights, early mornings, invisible to most customers and, at times, even to management. Yet he showed up, day after day, because he believed in work, in dignity, in a better tomorrow. On this particular morning, a man walked in. Plain clothes, no fanfare, just a stranger in a simple jacket and cap. What no one in the store knew was that this man was Marcus Bell, the CEO of the company, visiting undercover. He came not to judge, but to see the truth of his stores, his people, and his impact. So Marcus noticed Henry's trembling hands, the mop standing in a bucket of gray water. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked quietly. Henry hesitated, then said, "Sometimes it feels like no one cares." Those words pierced through Marcus like a blade. He had built this company on the promise of opportunity and respect. But here was a man who had given his years, and yet felt unseen. Marcus sat down with Henry right there in the break room. No titles, no hierarchy, just two human beings face to face. Henry opened up about his struggles, his wife's medical bills, his son's tuition, his exhaustion from juggling 2 jobs. Marcus listened, not as a CEO, but as a fellow American. He realized at that moment that leadership is not about corner offices or stock prices. Leadership is about people. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things just to keep going. The next week, Marcus called a meeting of his leadership team. He told Henry's story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. He raised wages, expanded healthcare benefits, and instituted mentorship programs. But more importantly, he mandated that every manager spend time on the floor each month, so working alongside their staff, listening to them, learning their lives. Word spread throughout the company. Morale soared. Turnover dropped. For the first time in years, employees felt seen and heard. Henry became a mentor to younger staff, sharing his hard-won wisdom. And Marcus, once a distant figure in a high-rise office, became a leader who walked among his people, not above them. This story is not just about one CEO or one janitor. It's about us, all of us. It's about the belief that no matter who you are, no matter where you start, dignity and respect are your birthright. It's about the understanding that leadership begins where titles end, in kindness, in courage, in the willingness to listen. And that's what this moment demands of us. Not cynicism, not division, but the courage to see one another, to lift one another, to make sacrifices for one another. The courage to believe, still, in a better future. So when you leave here today, remember Henry. Remember Marcus. Remember that each of us has the power to change someone's life. Not someday, but today. You don't have to be a CEO to lead. You don't have to have power to make a difference. You just have to care enough to act. Because in the end, the story of this company, this community, this country, is the story of ordinary people rising to extraordinary heights, not by stepping on each other, but by lifting each other up. Leadership is often imagined as a role of authority, strategy, and decision-making, but its deepest foundation is something quieter and far more human: empathy. In its truest form, leadership is not about issuing commands or sitting at the top of an organizational chart. It is about stepping into the lives of others, seeing the world through their eyes, and understanding their hopes, struggles, and fears. Empathy is not a soft skill or a sentimental gesture. It is the core of any lasting influence, the engine of unity, and the bridge between people who might otherwise remain strangers. To understand the power of empathy in leadership, imagine walking through the corridors of your company, your community, or your neighborhood not as an executive or an elected official, but as a listener and observer. You notice the quiet exhaustion in someone's eyes after a double shift, the nervousness of a new employee trying to prove themselves, the pride of a single parent balancing their job with raising a family. When leaders pay attention to these quiet realities, they become more than administrators of policies. They become caretakers of human dignity. Empathy allows leaders to connect beyond titles and roles. It transforms authority into service. When a leader sits down with an employee, a constituent, or a student and asks, "Tell me your story," something shifts. Walls come down. Trust begins to form. The act of listening itself becomes a kind of healing. For people who feel invisible, being heard is a recognition of their humanity. And for leaders who feel distant, listening reveals the truth behind the numbers, the lived experiences behind the reports. Empathy also sharpens judgment. A leader who listens deeply gains a perspective that cannot be gleaned from spreadsheets or dashboards. They begin to see patterns of hardship, of potential, of systemic flaws, and of untapped brilliance. Decisions made in such an atmosphere are wiser, more sustainable, and more just. This is why empathy is not a distraction from real leadership, but the very thing that makes real leadership possible. Without it, decisions become abstract and disconnected. With it, decisions become purposeful and grounded. In times of crisis, empathy steadies the ship. People do not rally behind leaders who are indifferent to their pain. They rally behind those who demonstrate understanding, even if they cannot solve every problem immediately. A leader who shows up in the hospital waiting room, in the disaster zone, or in the quiet corner of a store where someone stands crying, sends a message. "I see you. You matter. We are in this together." That message can sustain morale, inspire perseverance, and keep hope alive even when circumstances seem dire. Empathy also changes culture. When leaders model empathy, they give permission for everyone else to do the same. An organization built on empathy is one where people watch out for one another, collaborate rather than compete, and measure success not only by profit or performance, but by how people are treated. This does not mean lowering standards. It means raising the standard of humanity alongside the standard of excellence. People in such environments tend to be more innovative, more resilient, and more loyal because they feel valued as whole persons, not just as cogs in a machine. At a personal level, empathy strengthens a leader's character. It forces them to slow down, to consider the consequences of their actions, to temper ambition with conscience. It prevents arrogance from hardening into cruelty. It is a constant reminder that leadership is not a stage for self-promotion, but a responsibility to uplift others. When leaders cultivate empathy, they remain grounded, authentic, and attuned to the very people they serve. Empathy also holds the power to heal divides. In workplaces, in communities, and across nations, conflicts often arise from misunderstanding or indifference. Leaders who lead with empathy do not deny these conflicts, but they approach them with curiosity rather than contempt. They seek to understand why someone holds a certain belief, why they feel angry or excluded, why they resist change. In doing so, they can find common ground where none seemed possible and begin to stitch back the torn fabric of unity. The power of empathy in leadership is that it reveals the invisible threads tying people together. It uncovers the shared humanity beneath different uniforms, job titles, or backgrounds. So, it invites people out of isolation and into a collective story. And when people feel part of a story larger than themselves, when they feel seen, respected, and valued, they rise to the best of who they are. When we think of change makers, we often picture presidents, scientists, CEOs, or cultural icons. Yet history tells a different truth. Most of the meaningful progress in the world has not been driven by the powerful alone, but by ordinary people who refused to accept the limits imposed on them. Ordinary people, the ones who sweep the floors, work the registers, teach the classes, repair the streets, care for the sick, and volunteer after their shifts, are the heartbeat of every great transformation. The notion of ordinary is misleading. Every person carries within them a constellation of potential. The teacher in a small rural school who stays late to help a struggling student, the bus driver who greets every passenger with kindness, the neighbor who quietly checks on elderly residents during a storm. These people rarely make headlines, yet their actions ripple outward in ways they may never fully see. Leadership and influence are not defined by position, but by the decision to act with purpose. The power of ordinary people lies in their closeness to real life. They know the struggles firsthand, and because of that, their solutions and their compassion are authentic. A warehouse worker who notices unsafe conditions and speaks up can save lives. A cashier who diffuses a tense situation with calm words can restore dignity to everyone involved. A student who mentors younger classmates can inspire a chain reaction of courage and self-belief. These actions do not always seem heroic in the moment, but they become the invisible scaffolding of stronger communities. Consider the moments when someone stood up for you. Perhaps a mentor who believed in you before you believed in yourself, or a colleague who covered your shift when your child was sick. These are not gestures performed for applause, but for solidarity. They demonstrate that extraordinary impact is less about a single grand gesture and more about thousands of consistent, small choices made in alignment with our values. Ordinary people create extraordinary impact when they lean into perseverance. They show up day after day, even when recognition is absent and obstacles seem endless. Till they embody resilience, the quiet refusal to surrender to cynicism. This kind of perseverance inspires others in a way that flashy leadership never could. It says, if I can keep going, so can you. And in that simple example, it lights a path through hardship. The myth of the lone hero often distracts from the collective power of ordinary individuals. Real change usually unfolds as a mosaic of actions taken by many hands. The civil rights movement was sustained not only by its most visible leaders, but by countless ordinary people who marched, organized, and refused to comply with injustice. Public health advances were made possible not just by scientists, but by nurses, caregivers, and everyday citizens who advocated for clean water, vaccinations, and safer practices. When ordinary people recognize their collective influence, they stop seeing themselves as spectators and begin acting as architects of the future. The extraordinary impact of ordinary people also comes from their capacity to model integrity. In workplaces and communities, a single person's courage to do the right thing can shift the cultural norms. When one employee speaks up against unfair treatment, it gives others permission to do the same. When a community member volunteers their time to mentor youth, it signals that the next generation matters. In this way, ordinary people act as catalysts. Their example accelerates change and redefines what is acceptable. Furthermore, ordinary people bring humanity back to systems that can otherwise feel cold and impersonal. In an age of automation, policies, and algorithms, it is the individual human touch that restores dignity and meaning. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, or a courageous stand can soften hard edges and remind everyone involved that behind every number is a person, behind every transaction a story, behind every policy a life is impacted. This keynote also underscores that extraordinary impact does not require perfection. It requires willingness. Ordinary people often doubt their significance, believing that their voice or their vote or their act of kindness will not matter. Yet history consistently shows the opposite. Even small actions, when repeated and multiplied, create movements. They build trust. They shift culture. They seed possibilities that once seemed impossible. Ordinary people making extraordinary impacts also dismantle the myth that leadership is bestowed. Instead, it is assumed through action. A janitor mentoring a young hire, a parent advocating for safer crosswalks, a group of employees brainstorming ways to improve morale. These are not minor acts. They are the substance of change. They are proof that leadership belongs to anyone who accepts the responsibility to care and to act. When we recognize the extraordinary within the ordinary, we unlock a hidden source of power in our workplaces, neighborhoods, and nations. This recognition fuels mutual respect, sparks collaboration, and lifts morale. It tells every person, regardless of title or background, that their contribution matters and their presence counts. The image of leadership that dominates our culture is often one of distance, a figure on a stage, a voice from a podium, a silhouette in a corner office with tinted glass. Yet true leadership is not measured by how far one stands above others, but by how deeply one walks among them. The leaders who leave the deepest imprint are those who reject the pedestal in favor of proximity. They understand that credibility is earned not from titles or authority, but from the trust that grows when they stand shoulder to shoulder with those they lead. Walking among, not above, means rejecting the illusion of separation. It means entering the spaces where the work is done, where the stakes are real, and where people live out the consequences of decisions. It is easy to sign off on policies from a distant boardroom. It is harder to look someone in the eye and explain how those policies affect their livelihood. Leaders who walk among their people learn firsthand what those policies mean, what challenges their teams face, and where gaps between intention and reality may exist. This approach also transforms leadership from a performance into a practice. A leader walking the floor of a factory, visiting classrooms, attending community events, or spending time with frontline workers gains a texture of understanding that cannot be replicated in memos or reports. They see the rhythms of daily life, the small but telling details that reveal both problems and opportunities. They hear the candid concerns that rarely make it to formal channels. This kind of presence signals authenticity and humility, two qualities people instinctively respect. Walking among also fosters a sense of shared destiny. People do not rally around leaders who act as though they belong to a different world. They rally around leaders who embody the same stakes, who show up in the same storms, and who stand in the same spaces of uncertainty. When leaders make themselves visible in moments of difficulty, after a plant closes, during a natural disaster, in the wake of a community tragedy, they affirm the collective bond that makes unity possible. Proximity does not diminish authority, it deepens it. A leader who is present in the lives of their people is not less of a leader. They are more credible because their authority is grounded in lived understanding rather than abstract directives. They can explain decisions with nuance, address concerns with empathy, and inspire action with authenticity. People follow such leaders not because they must, but because they choose to. This keynote also underscores the discipline of humility. Walking among requires setting aside ego and embracing curiosity. It calls for leaders to admit they don't have all the answers, to listen rather than dictate, to observe rather than presume. This is not a loss of control but a gain in wisdom. By being present, leaders can see blind spots they didn't know they had, and discover strengths in their teams they hadn't fully appreciated. Walking among builds resilience across an organization or community. When leaders understand the real challenges their people face, they are better equipped to create policies and structures that support long-term well-being rather than short-term optics. They can anticipate problems earlier, respond with agility, and innovate in ways that feel practical rather than imposed. This responsiveness builds trust, and trust is the true currency of leadership. Moreover, walking reinforces dignity on all sides. It reminds leaders that every role matters, that no task is beneath respect, and that titles do not equate to worth. When a leader takes time to work alongside staff, volunteer in local efforts, or engage directly with constituents, it sends a signal that every contribution counts. This signal can lift morale, reduce turnover, and foster a culture of mutual respect. This practice also humanizes the leader themselves. Isolation breeds distortion. The longer someone stays in a bubble of advisors, filtered reports, and curated appearances, the easier it becomes to lose perspective. Proximity, by contrast, punctures that bubble. It keeps leaders rooted in reality, aware of their own fallibility, and accountable to the people they serve. A grounded leader makes better decisions because they understand the human texture behind the data. Walking among rather than above also challenges the outdated notion that leadership must always be visibly strong and detached. Strength is not detachment, strength is presence. It is the willingness to stand in discomfort, to witness suffering, and to bear the weight of decisions alongside the people affected. This is not only ethical but strategic. People who feel their leader's presence during hardship are more likely to stay engaged, contribute ideas, and go the extra mile because they feel part of something larger than themselves. Finally, walking encourages a culture of openness and accountability. When leaders make themselves accessible, they reduce the fear that often stifles honest feedback. Employees, citizens, and community members feel safer sharing their ideas and concerns. This openness becomes a fertile ground for innovation, collaboration, and problem-solving that no leader could orchestrate alone. At the heart of every enduring organization, movement, and community lies one principle that cannot be compromised: human dignity. It is not an accessory to leadership, it is its foundation. When dignity is treated as negotiable, everything else eventually fractures. Trust erodes, morale collapses, and progress stalls. When dignity is honored as inviolable, a culture of respect and purpose takes root, enabling people to bring their full selves to their work and their lives. Human dignity as a non-negotiable begins with recognition. Every person, regardless of their job, education, income, or background, carries inherent worth. This worth is not granted by position or performance. It exists because they are human. Leaders who internalize this truth make decisions differently. They evaluate policies, allocate resources, and design systems with an awareness that every number represents a life, every metric a lived experience, every outcome a human story. Treating dignity as essential also means looking beyond surface-level respect. Courtesy and manners matter, but dignity runs deeper. It is about acknowledging people as agents of their own lives, capable of contribution and growth. It is about giving voice to those who have been ignored, offering opportunities to those who have been overlooked, and creating spaces where individuals can express their perspectives without fear. In practice, this looks like fair wages, safe workplaces, accessible health care, transparent communication, and accountability for those in power. When leaders elevate dignity to the level of principle, they change the texture of daily interactions. Meetings become more inclusive, feedback becomes more constructive, and disagreements become opportunities for mutual understanding rather than personal attacks. The small decisions. How someone is spoken to, how grievances are handled, how recognition is offered, accumulate into a culture that either affirms or undermines dignity. This culture determines whether people feel motivated to excel or pressured to withdraw. Human dignity as a non-negotiable also fuels resilience. People can endure great challenges if they feel respected in the process. When workers know they are treated fairly, when citizens know their voices matter, when students know they are seen as capable, they draw strength from that respect. They are more likely to adapt to change, take risks, and invest in the collective future. By contrast, when dignity is compromised, when people feel disposable or invisible, even minor changes can provoke resistance and despair. This keynote underscores that upholding dignity is not only a moral imperative, but also a strategic advantage. Organizations and societies rooted in dignity enjoy higher trust, lower turnover, and greater innovation. People are not afraid to bring ideas forward, admit mistakes, or seek help when they know their humanity will not be weaponized against them. This atmosphere reduces hidden problems and increases collaboration. It creates a cycle in which respect breeds openness, openness breeds improvement, and improvement strengthens respect. Recognizing dignity also requires confronting systems and habits that dehumanize. This can be uncomfortable work. It means questioning biases, rethinking assumptions, and challenging hierarchies that treat people as interchangeable. It may involve redistributing resources, rewriting policies, or holding powerful figures accountable. But this work is essential because dignity cannot be selective. If it applies only to the privileged or the favored, it ceases to be dignity at all. Leaders committed to human dignity also embody it in their daily behavior. They use language that uplifts rather than diminishes. They solicit input from those at every level. They acknowledge mistakes and apologize when necessary. They celebrate contributions that might otherwise go unnoticed. In doing so, they show that dignity is not an abstract value but a lived practice. Human dignity as a non-negotiable transcends cultural, political, and economic differences. It is a universal thread connecting people across boundaries. By affirming this dignity, leaders tap into a deeper sense of shared humanity that can withstand crises, disagreements, and setbacks. It becomes the common ground on which trust and progress can be built. Making dignity non-negotiable also sets a standard for personal responsibility. It calls on individuals at every level, not just those in positions of authority, to uphold the same principle. Colleagues can respect one another's time and contributions. Teams can resolve conflicts without humiliation. Communities can debate policies without erasing each other's humanity. In this way, dignity becomes not only a leadership value, but a collective discipline practiced daily. Listening may seem like one of the simplest human skills, yet in leadership it is among the most transformative. In a culture that rewards speaking, performing, and commanding, the ability to listen deeply is nothing short of revolutionary. Listening shifts power from hierarchy to humanity. It tells people, you are seen. You are heard. You matter. When leaders practice authentic listening, they open a door to trust, creativity, and collaboration that cannot be forced by authority alone. Listening as a revolutionary act begins with presence. Too often, leaders sit in meetings or town halls physically present, but mentally absent, already drafting their response before the other person has even finished speaking. True listening demands more. It requires setting aside one's agenda, silencing the inner monologue, and entering the world of another person's experience. This level of attention communicates respect and gives the speaker the courage to speak honestly. When leaders listen, they gain access to a reality otherwise hidden from them. Reports, metrics, and dashboards present numbers, people present truths. Employees, citizens, and students carry knowledge about processes, obstacles, and opportunities that leaders may never see from their vantage point. By listening, leaders invite those truths into the light, creating a richer, more accurate understanding of what is actually happening. Listening also dismantles barriers of fear and hierarchy. In organizations where people feel they cannot speak openly, problems fester. When a leader listens with empathy and without retaliation, it signals safety. It invites feedback, complaints, and ideas before they escalate into crises. This preventive power makes listening one of the most cost-effective and human-centered strategies for improvement. Listening as a revolutionary act transforms not only systems but relationships. It creates a bond that no policy can replicate. When someone shares their story and feels genuinely heard, they experience a validation that can change how they see themselves and their role. They begin to believe their contribution matters. They develop a sense of belonging. They are more likely to commit, collaborate, and innovate. Listening is also an antidote to arrogance. Leaders at every level are prone to the illusion that their view is complete, that their expertise suffices. Listening disrupts that illusion by revealing blind spots and alternative perspectives. It forces humility, reminding leaders that wisdom is distributed, not centralized, and that insight can come from any corner of the room. This humility strengthens decision-making, making it more inclusive, balanced, and sustainable. At its core, listening is about dignity. It affirms that the person speaking has value, regardless of their title, experience, or background. This affirmation builds bridges across differences. It allows people who might never agree on everything to still understand one another's humanity. In a world where disagreement so often leads to dehumanization, listening becomes a radical act of preservation, preserving relationships, preserving trust, preserving the possibility of working together. Listening also fuels innovation. When people feel heard, they share ideas they might otherwise keep to themselves. They voice concerns early, suggest improvements, and point out inefficiencies. These contributions can lead to breakthroughs in quality, safety, and culture. An organization where listening is the norm becomes more agile and adaptive because it is constantly learning from the ground up. This keynote underscores that listening is active, not passive. It is not merely waiting for one's turn to speak or nodding politely. It involves asking thoughtful questions, summarizing what you've heard, and seeking clarification to ensure understanding. It involves noticing what is not being said, the silences, the hesitations, the emotions between words. This active engagement communicates sincerity and fosters deeper trust. Listening as a revolutionary act also requires patience. In a world accustomed to speed, leaders must resist the urge to rush conversations or demand instant answers. People reveal their truths gradually, especially if they have been ignored or dismissed in the past. Leaders who give time and space for real dialogue signal that these truths matter, that they are worth waiting for. Moreover, listening does not mean agreement. Leaders can acknowledge someone's perspective without endorsing it. This distinction is critical. The goal of listening is understanding, not surrender. But once understanding is achieved, decisions are made on a far stronger foundation, with clearer awareness of the human impact involved. Finally, listening shapes culture. When a leader models deep listening, others begin to mirror that behavior. Teams become more collaborative. Meetings become more productive. Conflicts become more resolvable. Over time, listening evolves from a skill into a norm, and from a norm into an identity. Across history, some of the strongest communities and most enduring movements have not been built in times of ease, but forged in the crucible of shared struggle. When people experience hardship together, something remarkable happens. Differences that once seemed immovable begin to soften, and a sense of common purpose takes root. Shared struggle is not simply about enduring pain. It is about finding in one another the courage, empathy, and resilience to move forward. This keynote begins with a simple truth: hardship is a universal language. People may come from different backgrounds, speak different dialects, and hold different beliefs, but the experience of striving against adversity resonates across those boundaries. A team of workers braving night shifts, a neighborhood rebuilding after a storm, a group of volunteers responding to a crisis. All find their individual stories weaving into a collective narrative of perseverance. This narrative becomes the soil in which unity can grow. Shared struggle builds unity because it reveals what is essential. When survival, safety, or dignity are at stake, the superficial hierarchies of status or privilege fade. People come to value reliability, integrity, and solidarity over appearances or titles. A leader who shows up alongside their people during difficult times earns a trust no speech can buy. A colleague who sacrifices comfort to help another through hardship becomes a quiet pillar of the group. These acts, repeated and multiplied, create a bond of mutual respect. This bond often leads to a kind of moral clarity. In ordinary times, people can become distracted by competition, self-interest, or minor grievances. But in a shared struggle, priorities sharpen. Individuals see one another not as competitors but as partners in endurance. They recognize that their success is intertwined. This recognition fuels cooperation and reduces isolation, transforming fragmented groups into cohesive communities. Shared struggle also creates a powerful sense of ownership. When people contribute to rebuilding after a setback, they feel invested in the outcome. They are no longer passive participants but active stakeholders. This investment deepens commitment and accountability. It turns abstract goals into personal missions, energizing people to give their best even when resources are scarce. Another dimension of shared struggle is its capacity to foster empathy. When you know someone's hardships firsthand, it becomes harder to dismiss their pain or minimize their perspective. Workers on a demanding project, soldiers in the field, or citizens during a natural disaster develop an intuitive understanding of one another's limits and strengths. This empathy transcends demographic or ideological differences, grounding relationships in lived experience rather than assumption. Shared struggle can also catalyze innovation. When resources are limited and stakes are high, creativity flourishes. People collaborate to solve problems in ways that would never arise in comfort. They discover new methods, develop cross-functional skills, and learn to adapt on the fly. The solutions born of hardship often carry a unique durability because they have been tested under pressure. Leaders who understand the unifying power of shared struggle do not shield themselves from difficulty. They step into it with their people. They acknowledge pain without dramatizing it, encourage hope without denying reality, and model perseverance without sacrificing authenticity. This posture strengthens the entire group. It communicates, "We are in this together," not as a slogan but as a lived truth. It is also important to recognize that shared struggle, while unifying, can be unevenly experienced. Leaders must be mindful of disparities in power, privilege, and vulnerability. Unity born from struggle should not require some to bear disproportionate burdens. Fairness and equity must be part of the process, or resentment will erode the bonds being formed. This awareness strengthens unity by ensuring it rests on justice, not coercion. Shared struggle builds a memory bank of collective triumph. Over time, these memories become part of a community's identity, a reservoir of stories that inspire future generations. People can point to moments when they overcame obstacles together, when they refused to let hardship divide them. These stories serve as anchors during future challenges, reminding everyone what they are capable of when they stand together. At a personal level, participating in a shared struggle reshapes character. It teaches patience, humility, and gratitude. It sharpens empathy and reveals the interconnectedness of all people. It demonstrates that no one succeeds entirely alone and that every achievement carries the fingerprints of others' support, sacrifice, or inspiration. Shared struggle builds unity because it pushes people beyond the transactional into the transformational. It moves relationships from convenience to covenant, from shallow alliances to deep trust. In such an environment, the bonds forged are not easily broken, and the sense of belonging endures long after the hardship has passed. Every movement for progress, every transformation in an organization or a society, begins not with a grand decree, but with an individual decision. Personal responsibility is the hidden engine of collective change. It is the quiet moment when someone chooses to act differently, to speak up, to improve themselves, or to care for someone else. Without personal responsibility, even the best design systems stagnate. With it, ordinary people become architects of extraordinary change. Personal responsibility starts with ownership. It means recognizing that one's choices, attitudes, and actions matter, not just for oneself but for the community. This ownership is empowering. It shifts the narrative from Someone else should fix this. 2. I have a role to play. It transforms people from passive recipients of circumstance into active shapers of their environment. This shift in mindset can turn resignation into resolve, frustration into focus, and apathy into action. When individuals embrace responsibility, they elevate the standards of their surroundings. A workplace where each person takes responsibility for quality, for fairness, and for treating others with respect will outperform one where blame is constantly shifted. A community where people take responsibility for their neighborhoods, schools, and public spaces will thrive even when resources are scarce. The principle applies at every level. When people hold themselves accountable, trust grows, and trust is the foundation of sustainable progress. Personal responsibility also builds credibility. Words inspire, but actions persuade. A leader who expects punctuality but arrives late undermines their message. A colleague who calls for fairness but hoards opportunities erodes trust. By contrast, individuals who live their values quietly yet consistently become beacons of integrity. People look to them not because of their titles, but because of their character. This credibility amplifies their influence far beyond what formal authority could achieve. Taking responsibility also encourages self-reflection. It requires an honest appraisal of one's impact, an openness to feedback, and a willingness to change course. This self-awareness strengthens decision-making and deepens empathy. Individuals who understand their own flaws are less likely to judge others harshly, more likely to mentor, and better prepared to lead. Such self-reflection, multiplied across a team or a community, creates a culture of continuous improvement rather than defensiveness. Another dimension of personal responsibility is initiative. Responsibility does not end at avoiding harm, it extends to proactively doing good. It calls on individuals to identify gaps, solve problems, and anticipate needs without waiting to be told. Initiative is the expression of ownership in action. It transforms bystanders into contributors and turns ideas into tangible results. In organizations, this initiative often leads to innovation. In communities, it strengthens resilience. Personal responsibility also provides stability during times of uncertainty. When systems are in flux or leadership is absent, the self-discipline and reliability of individuals can hold the fabric together. Colleagues who keep commitments, neighbors who support one another, and students who take their learning seriously become the quiet anchors that prevent collapse. This steadiness creates the conditions for rebuilding, adapting, and eventually thriving. Importantly, personal responsibility is not about self-blame or rugged individualism. It does not mean ignoring systemic barriers or excusing injustice. Rather, it means exercising agency within one's sphere of influence while also working to change larger structures. It acknowledges the reality of constraints while refusing to be defined solely by them. This balanced view allows people to claim their power without denying the need for collective action. Personal responsibility also strengthens relationships. People who keep their word, admit mistakes, and show reliability earn trust. This trust is the lubricant of collaboration. It allows teams to move quickly, communities to organize effectively, and institutions to recover from setbacks. When each person is accountable, conflict diminishes and respect flourishes. The result is not only higher performance, but a deeper sense of belonging and mutual respect. At a societal level, personal responsibility can spark movements. One individual practicing courage can inspire another and another until the ripple becomes a wave. A whistleblower exposing corruption, a teacher mentoring disadvantaged youth, a neighbor cleaning up a neglected park. These actions may appear small, but they shift norms and expectations. They demonstrate that positive change is possible, making it easier for others to step forward. Finally, personal responsibility nurtures resilience. People who hold themselves accountable develop inner strength. They are less swayed by external validation and more anchored in their own values. This resilience allows them to weather setbacks, learn from failures, and continue moving forward. In this way, Personal responsibility becomes not only a catalyst for change, but a shield against despair. Leadership at its highest form is not about control, but about cultivation. It is the shift from merely managing tasks to mentoring people. Management focuses on processes, metrics, and outputs. Mentorship focuses on growth, potential, and transformation. This distinction matters because organizations and communities are not just systems. They are collections of human beings who want to be seen, developed, and empowered. When leaders embrace mentorship over management, they create environments where people flourish rather than merely function. Mentorship begins with the belief that every person holds untapped potential. This belief changes the way a leader interacts with their team. Instead of viewing individuals as interchangeable resources, the mentor sees them as unique contributors with distinctive talents and aspirations. This perspective encourages curiosity. What does this person care about? Where do they want to grow? What strengths can be nurtured? These questions shift the leader's energy from directing to developing. The mentor leader also invests in relationships rather than transactions. Management often operates on a command and control basis where the goal is compliance. Mentorship operates on trust and dialogue, where the goal is capacity. This approach deepens loyalty and engagement because people feel someone is invested in their long-term success, not only their short-term output. The trust created by mentorship can turn hesitant employees into confident leaders and disengaged teams into innovative forces. Mentorship over management is not soft or indulgent, it is demanding in a different way. It requires patience, consistency, and the humility to guide rather than dictate. Mentors model behaviors and values rather than simply enforcing rules. They encourage autonomy, critical thinking, and resilience. This kind of leadership often produces more sustainable results because people internalize the lessons rather than obey out of fear. Another dimension of mentorship is its focus on two-way learning. A true mentor does not only teach but also listens, learns, and adapts. This reciprocal relationship keeps leaders connected to emerging trends, frontline realities, and new ideas. It also breaks down the hierarchy that can stifle innovation. When a leader listens to their mentees, they gain insight into how policies and practices play out on the ground, which can inform better decisions at the top. Mentorship over management also builds culture. In a purely managerial system, people may comply but rarely go beyond the minimum. In a mentorship culture, people feel encouraged to experiment, take risks, and collaborate. They see their workplace or community as a learning environment rather than a static hierarchy. This culture attracts and retains talent because it meets a deeper human need, the desire to grow and to matter. Mentorship prioritizes long-term impact over short-term efficiency. Management can often be focused on immediate results, hitting quarterly goals, finishing projects, keeping budgets tight. Mentorship takes a broader view. It asks who will be ready to lead tomorrow. Who will carry this vision forward when today's leaders step aside? This generational perspective strengthens continuity and stability. It ensures that values, skills, and institutional knowledge are passed on, not lost. The mentor leader also recognizes the power of storytelling and example. Rather than simply instructing, they demonstrate. They show how to navigate setbacks, how to handle conflict with dignity, and how to balance ambition with ethics. This modeling is far more impactful than directives. People remember how a leader acted under pressure more than they remember what that leader said in a meeting. So mentorship over management also extends beyond formal roles. It is not limited to one-on-one sessions or career development plans. It is a way of being present. It can happen in hallway conversations, on the job training, or small gestures of encouragement. By normalizing mentorship as part of everyday life, leaders make development accessible to all, not just a select few. Finally, mentorship cultivates leaders at every level. When people are mentored, they in turn learn to mentor others. This creates a cascading effect where development becomes self-replicating. Teams that practice mentorship build internal networks of support and knowledge, sharing that outlast any single leader. This resilience makes organizations and communities less dependent on hierarchy and more adaptable to change. Mentorship over management shifts the focus from extracting value to creating value. It redefines leadership as an act of service rather than a position of control. It aligns authority with empathy, responsibility with trust, and vision with human development. Throughout history, progress has never been automatic. It has been driven by the courage of individuals who stood up, spoke out, and confronted injustice, even when it was unpopular or dangerous to do so. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. Injustice thrives in silence, and it withers under the light of moral courage. The power to challenge wrongdoing lies not only in leaders or institutions, but also in ordinary people who refuse to look away. Courage to confront injustice begins with moral clarity. It requires the willingness to see what is wrong, even when others are looking the other way. This clarity does not come from ideology or partisanship. It comes from a commitment to human dignity, fairness, and truth. People who embody this clarity recognize that neutrality in the face of harm is not impartiality but complicity. They refuse to be lulled into comfort by the idea that someone else will intervene. The next dimension of courage is empathy. Those who confront injustice do so not only for their own benefit but for others, often those with less power or fewer resources. Empathy transforms outrage into action. It bridges the gap between one's own safety and another's suffering. This willingness to stand in solidarity with those who are vulnerable elevates courage from an act of rebellion to an act of service. Confronting injustice also requires preparation. Courage without strategy can be reckless. Strategy without courage can be hollow. Those who make a difference study the systems they seek to change, understand the risks, and plan their actions carefully. This preparation gives their courage both effectiveness and resilience. It turns symbolic gestures into sustained movements and moral outrage into measurable progress. Another dimension of this keynote is the recognition that confronting injustice often begins in small, unglamorous ways. It might be an employee calling out unethical behavior in a workplace, a neighbor intervening to stop harassment, or a student challenging a discriminatory policy at school. These acts rarely make headlines, but they build the muscle of moral courage. Over time, they create cultures where injustice finds fewer places to hide. Leadership plays a critical role in normalizing the courage to confront injustice. When leaders protect whistleblowers, honor dissent, and listen to criticism, they cultivate an environment where people feel safer speaking up. When leaders punish or ignore truth-telling, they foster a culture of fear and silence. The example set at the top cascades down through every level of an organization or community. Courage to confront injustice also involves self-reflection. It is not only about pointing outward but also inward, examining one's own biases, privileges, and blind spots. This humility strengthens credibility and prevents hypocrisy. People who acknowledge their own growth journey inspire others to join them because they show that confronting injustice is not about perfection but about commitment. Injustice is rarely isolated. It is often systemic. Courage, therefore, requires persistence. A single protest, a single speech, or a single lawsuit may not bring change, but sustained effort can. This persistence is draining, which is why those who confront injustice must also cultivate hope and community. They need networks of support, moments of rest, and a vision of what justice looks like to carry them through setbacks. The courage to confront injustice also demands creative tactics. From peaceful marches to art, from investigative journalism to community organizing, people have used countless tools to shine light on wrongdoing. Creativity allows movements to outmaneuver repression, connect with new audiences, and keep their message alive. It also provides ways for individuals to participate according to their own talents, making the movement more inclusive. Another dimension of courage is the willingness to endure consequences. Speaking truth to power can bring retaliation, loss of status, or even physical danger. Those who take this path often make sacrifices, yet their willingness to bear costs can shift public perception and inspire others. When people witness courage, it activates something deep within them. The recognition that they, too, can act. Courage to confront injustice ultimately fosters transformation. It changes not only institutions but individuals. It builds character, strengthens empathy, and enlarges one's sense of responsibility. It demonstrates that people are not powerless in the face of wrongdoing. Every time someone resists complicity, challenges cruelty, or interrupts harm, they create a ripple that weakens the hold of injustice. Great change often begins not with sweeping declarations, but with gestures so small they might seem invisible at first glance. A held door, a word of encouragement, a quiet donation, a listening ear. These acts, humble and uncelebrated, are the lifeblood of a compassionate society. While headlines tend to glorify dramatic events, the truth is that daily life is shaped far more by the steady accumulation of small acts of kindness. Kindness is not weakness. It requires awareness, empathy, and intentionality. In moments of stress or division, kindness asks us to pause, to choose humanity over hostility. It operates as a quiet counterforce to cynicism, turning what might have been a transaction into a moment of connection. Whether in a boardroom, a classroom, or a street corner, small kindnesses rehumanize environments that can otherwise feel cold and impersonal. One of the remarkable things about small acts of kindness is their ripple effect. A single gesture can set off a chain reaction. A person treated with respect and warmth is more likely to extend the same to others. This domino effect is subtle but powerful, seeding goodwill and resilience across networks of people who may never even meet. In workplaces, it improves morale and cooperation. In neighborhoods, it strengthens trust. In society, it cultivates a shared sense of dignity. These small acts also chip away at isolation. In our fast-paced world, loneliness and alienation are among the quietest but most pervasive challenges. A smile, a greeting, or a sincere thank you may seem trivial, yet for someone feeling unseen, it can serve as a lifeline. This is how kindness scales not as a program or a mandate, but as countless interactions that build a fabric of belonging. Leaders who recognize the power of small acts of kindness understand that culture is shaped as much by tone as by policy. A CEO who makes time to ask an employee about their family, a teacher who notices a struggling student's effort, a neighbor who checks in on an elderly resident. These choices establish norms. They model what matters. And because they are replicable, they empower others to do the same, democratizing compassion. Kindness also reframes power. In hierarchical settings, it can equalize relationships, reminding everyone of their shared humanity. A manager offering encouragement to a junior staff member, a public official listening attentively to a constituent, or a supervisor expressing gratitude to a janitor, all send a signal worth is not tied to status. This signal undermines the logic of exclusion and builds a culture of mutual respect. Importantly, small acts of kindness are not contingent on wealth or influence. They are accessible to anyone, regardless of background or resources. This universality is one of their greatest strengths. A student, a retiree, a business owner, or a parent can all contribute. Even in contexts where injustice persists, kindness can serve as both a refuge and a form of quiet resistance, affirming dignity in the face of dehumanization. Kindness is also an investment in resilience. People who feel supported and valued are better able to weather crises. Communities where kindness is normalized recover faster from shocks because trust accelerates cooperation. During natural disasters, for example, stories often emerge of neighbors sharing food, volunteers showing up unasked, strangers forming rescue chains. These are not anomalies but reflections of a latent capacity for kindness that surfaces when it is needed most. Small acts of kindness also enhance self-respect. So, doing good for others nourishes the giver as well as the receiver. Psychologists have long noted that altruistic behavior increases well-being, reduces stress, and strengthens one's sense of purpose. This positive feedback loop reinforces itself, making kindness a sustainable practice rather than a one-time event. Another important aspect is visibility. While kindness does not seek applause, leaders and institutions can amplify its impact by recognizing and celebrating it. Stories of small but meaningful gestures, a bus driver shielding passengers from danger, a child organizing a food drive, so an employee quietly mentoring a newcomer, inspire others to act. They shift cultural narratives away from cynicism toward possibility. Finally, small acts of kindness teach us humility. They remind us that transformation is not always about grand strategies or monumental changes. It is about consistent, human-scale choices made again and again. These choices, while seemingly minor, form the foundation upon which larger movements of empathy and justice are built. In every generation, the ability to bridge divides has marked the difference between societies that flourish and those that fracture. Diversity of thought, culture, and experience is an extraordinary strength, but only when it is woven into a fabric of understanding, rather than left as a patchwork of isolated identities. Building bridges across differences is neither simple nor superficial. It is the patient work of listening, empathy, and mutual respect. The first step in bridge building is to recognize the dignity of the other. No dialogue, policy, or initiative can succeed if it begins from a place of contempt. When people see one another as fully human, with their own fears, hopes, and histories, the barriers of stereotype and suspicion begin to crumble. This recognition does not erase disagreement. It makes disagreement constructive rather than corrosive. Building bridges across differences also requires curiosity. Curiosity turns encounters into opportunities for learning rather than conflict. It invites questions instead of assumptions. A manager seeking to understand an employee's cultural background, a neighbor attending another community's celebration, or a student learning the history of a marginalized group. All are practicing the humble art of curiosity. This willingness to learn destabilizes prejudice and replaces it with insight. Listening is another cornerstone. In a polarized world, genuine listening is almost radical. It is not waiting for one's turn to respond, but giving full attention to another person's perspective. Listening signals respect, even when agreement is impossible. It softens defensiveness, builds trust, and reveals common ground. When leaders and institutions model deep listening, they set a tone that filters down through organizations and neighborhoods alike. Bridge building also means acknowledging historical wounds. Differences do not emerge in a vacuum. They are often shaped by legacies of injustice or exclusion. Ignoring this history risks minimizing the lived experiences of others. Acknowledgement, on the other hand, lays the groundwork for healing. It is not an act of blame but of truth, telling, allowing both sides to move forward with honesty and integrity. Another dimension of this keynote is creating shared spaces. Physical and symbolic spaces where people from different backgrounds can collaborate, learn, and solve problems together are essential. Whether it's a community center, a cross-functional workplace project, or a joint volunteer effort, these spaces normalize interaction and break down silos. They reveal that cooperation is not only possible but beneficial. Building bridges requires courage as well. It takes courage to leave one's echo chamber, to risk misunderstanding, or to confront one's own biases. It also takes courage to reach out to those whose views or experiences challenge one's identity or comfort. This courage is not about erasing difference, but about embracing the complexity of the human family. Education plays a vital role in bridge building. Schools, workplaces, and civic institutions that teach cultural literacy, empathy, and conflict resolution equip people with the skills to navigate differences. When individuals learn how to disagree respectfully, negotiate across values, and find common goals, diversity ceases to be a liability and becomes a force multiplier. Leaders who build bridges do so not by demanding uniformity, but by cultivating unity. They understand that unity is not sameness, it is a shared commitment to the well-being of all, even amid disagreement. They celebrate pluralism as a source of creativity and resilience. This kind of leadership resists the easy temptation of scapegoating or division, recognizing instead that the most enduring achievements are built collectively. Bridge building also requires patience. Differences that have been entrenched for decades or centuries will not dissolve overnight. Progress comes through sustained effort, small breakthroughs, and the slow accumulation of trust. Patience allows people to stay engaged even when outcomes are uncertain or setbacks occur. Another essential ingredient is shared purpose. When people work together on something larger than themselves, whether rebuilding after a disaster, launching a new business, or advocating for a common cause, differences recede in the face of mutual goals. This does not erase identity, it reframes it within a bigger story, one where each person's contribution matters. Finally, building bridges across differences is an act of imagination. It calls on people to envision a future that does not yet exist, a community or institution where cooperation transcends division. This vision energizes the difficult work of dialogue and compromise. It provides hope during setbacks and courage during conflict. Without imagination, difference can feel like a permanent barrier. With imagination, it becomes the starting point for something richer. Every era of progress has been powered by a single, enduring force: belief. Belief that the present moment, however difficult, is not the end of the story. Belief that ordinary people, through courage and persistence, can write a brighter chapter for those who follow. Belief that even when institutions falter and storms rage, a better future remains possible. This belief is not naive optimism, it is disciplined hope, the kind that sustains effort and imagination even when the odds appear overwhelming. Belief in a better future begins with vision. Vision gives shape to hope. It transforms vague yearning into something tangible and motivating. Leaders, educators, parents, and community builders throughout history have rallied people around visions larger than their individual lives. These visions create direction, energize action, and provide a shared language of possibility. Without vision, even the most talented groups drift. With it, they cohere around a common horizon. This belief also requires courage. Cynicism is easy and fashionable, especially in times of disruption. Hope requires vulnerability, the willingness to be disappointed, the risk of standing out in a crowd that has settled for resignation. People who believe in a better future risk ridicule or skepticism because they refuse to accept the way things are as inevitable. Yet their courage sparks others to reconsider their assumptions and join them in imagining alternatives. Belief in a better future is rooted not only in ideals but also in action. It is expressed through work, service, and persistence. A teacher who stays late to tutor a struggling student, an organizer who fights for policy changes, an entrepreneur who creates jobs in a struggling town, all embody belief through effort. This practical dimension grounds belief in reality and shields it from becoming mere sentiment. Another dimension of belief is collective ownership. A better future cannot be outsourced. It must be built by those who inhabit it. When people feel excluded from shaping the future, hope erodes. When they feel included, even small wins reinforce their sense of agency. This shared ownership strengthens democracy, communities, and workplaces alike. It transforms belief from a solitary emotion into a collective movement. Belief in a better future also thrives on storytelling. Stories remind people of past struggles and victories. They show that progress is rarely linear, but often punctuated by setbacks and rebounds. They affirm that those who came before also faced impossible odds and prevailed. By weaving together individual narratives into a collective memory, storytelling helps sustain belief during hard times. Crucially, belief in a better future must be inclusive. A future built on exclusion or hierarchy will always be fragile. Inclusion ensures that the better future is not merely better for some but better for all. This inclusive belief respects diversity and recognizes the dignity of each person's contribution. It moves beyond charity to solidarity, beyond tokenism to true belonging. Belief also fuels innovation. When people think a problem is unsolvable, they stop trying. When they believe it can be solved, creativity ignites. This mindset transforms industries, reimagines institutions, and revitalizes communities. Many of the world's greatest breakthroughs, from civil rights to medical advances, were once considered impossible dreams sustained only by a few visionaries who believed in them. Belief in a better future builds resilience. Setbacks, failures, and disappointments are inevitable, but belief allows individuals and communities to interpret these not as endpoints, but as part of the process. This interpretation prevents despair, restores motivation, and keeps long-term goals in view. In this way, belief acts as a stabilizing force, anchoring people during turbulence. Another important dimension is leadership by example. Leaders who embody belief in their words and actions give others permission to believe as well. They do not deny challenges, but frame them within a narrative of potential. They remind people of their shared values and their capacity to overcome. Such leadership turns belief from an abstraction into a lived experience. Finally, belief in a better future is contagious. It spreads through conversations, classrooms, workplaces, and social networks. When someone speaks with conviction about what is possible, it awakens something dormant in those who hear it. This contagion of hope does not erase the world's difficulties, but it changes the energy with which people face them. In this way, belief becomes not just an individual trait, but a cultural force capable of reshaping entire systems. As the weeks turned into months, the quiet moment between the undercover CEO and the crying janitor became the spark for something far larger than either of them could have imagined. The store began to change. Policies that once ignored workers' dignity were rewritten with compassion and fairness at their core. Training shifted from control to mentorship. Employees began to feel seen, heard, and valued, not as numbers on a spreadsheet, but as human beings with stories, dreams, and struggles. The janitor, once anonymous and invisible, became a living reminder that leadership starts at the ground level. His courage to speak his truth and the CEO's willingness to listen opened the door for countless others to voice their concerns. The walls of silence cracked, and in their place rose bridges of trust. Ordinary staff members started to take personal responsibility for the culture of their workplace. Managers who had once been distant began to act as mentors. Small acts of kindness multiplied. What emerged was not just a turnaround story, but a testament to the power of empathy in leadership. A company that had been divided by hierarchy began to unite around shared values. People stopped waiting for someone else to fix things. They started lifting one another up, investing in each other's growth, and believing again in the purpose of their work. This transformation spread beyond the store's walls. Other branches took notice. Communities surrounding the stores saw new programs, fairer wages, and stronger partnerships. The company's reputation shifted from a faceless corporation to a living example of what happens when leadership chooses to see its people. And in the center of it all stood a simple but profound lesson. No matter how high you rise, the measure of your leadership is how deeply you care for those at the base. Compassion, courage, and a belief in a better future are not luxuries. They are the cornerstones of enduring success. The janitor's tears and the CEO's decision to act turned an ordinary day into a defining moment, proving that even the smallest act of humanity can ignite change powerful enough to reshape lives and inspire a new standard for leadership everywhere.